started, I'm just going to go ahead and get started with the talk, and ideally we'll save questions until the very end. I'm sure the facilitators will be able to keep track of the questions. And for those of you who don't want to write it in the chat, don't worry, there'll be definitely plenty of time for questions at the end. So I just again want to say thank you so much to the Raise Echo community for inviting me to talk on my decision making between moving from academics to industry. I hope the title piques your interest, and I'm sure we're going to have some fantastic discussion. So this is my obligatory disclosure slides because I went to industry. This presentation is for informational purposes only, and the content represents my own opinions. All right, so today's roadmap includes 5 brief stops. After a brief intro into my journey, each section represents a different stage in the decision-making process toward a change in career. This is a pretty packed didactic. I've compressed it as much as possible, but periodically you're going to see questions that I want you to ask yourself, perhaps later over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, in case you too are considering a career change or even just a change in position. So first, I do need to share my prior situation, how I got to my turning point, so that you can see why this was the right change for me. And perhaps you'll see some commonalities with your situation. So I've been on the academic path for 20 plus years, and I've had a blast. Research and grant writing were my 2 bedfellows, and this was literal at times, as I would bring that work into my physical bed. But during undergrad, I was doing preclinical research, then med school and a master's in public health. And after residency, I went on to a pulmonary and crit care fellowship, where I was supported on our sections T32. After being recruited as a clinician researcher to Mount Sinai, I was on a K-12, then my own K-23, with additional funding through foundation grants and clinical trial funds. But then the pandemic hit. My research was majorly waylaid, but I threw myself into COVID clinical trials, put in a slew of failed grant submissions, and even was promoted despite all this craziness. However, come spring of 2022, I knew this life wasn't the end all for me, and I decided to exit. After my exit, of course, that's when my MPI R1 ended up getting funded, but So what changed? Obviously, the pandemic happened, and the devastating impact it has had on the US, the world, and also the medical community, frontline workers, cannot be underemphasized. It was a tough time to be an ICU physician, but I would argue that it highlighted the already existing bed sores in my clinical and academic world, ones that were just not healing. In my work world, the clinical environment was suffering. We were all overworked, understaffed, having increased responsibilities without relief, and I was constantly having to generate and justify my value, even when those benchmarks were always moving. My life needs were also crowing for attention. I have young kids and elderly parents. My own health was suffering after 2 decades of self-neglect and no sleep, and I realized that I wasn't having enough impact to improve the lives of patients in a satisfying way. So why was I still on this roller coaster? Here's where I want you to think about what academia is to you. I don't need answers right now, but I will share what was going through my head at the time. Is this still my life calling? Do I love the challenge? Is it because I'm really good at it? Am I trying to live up to internal or maybe even external expectations? I do have brown parents after all. Am I programmed to be an academic per my pedigree? Or is it a little bit of an addiction, the rush of discovery of getting that paper tweeted by an academic celeb? So for me, the current job was the safe option. This is the devil I knew. I was familiar already with all the pros and cons, but that didn't make it the right option. And I could no longer be oblivious to the cons that were not tangibly improving. So it was a time for a change. This is a quote by the famous Business Gazette, Jack Welch: change before you have to. Notice that I don't say change before it's too late, because that's never true. You could always change, but how do you know you need a change? How do you know when? Is it even possible? Now, I give this talk with huge caveats, because I can only share my perspective and the various pieces of advice that have been given to me along the way. And that advice was reflect and start with some baby steps. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with the trans-theoretical model for stages of change. We use this to conceptualize the approach to smoking cessation at home. This model has been around forever by Prochaska and Norcross in the field of health psychology to help with problem behaviors. Stages include pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. Now, there's a 6th phase not shown here, relapse, but I admit it deliberately, as I want to use this model with a broader application to personal change as it relates to career. Now, this change for me was still both cognitive and psychological, mirroring the process seen in this model. So let's walk through each stage briefly. Should you stay in your lane? You've trained to do something specific to a certain environment, right? This is that pre-contemplation phase. And the wonderful thing about medicine is that there's a clear road forward, at least in the early years. And in the clinician scientist pathway, that's that pipeline from T to F to K to R to UP for some of us. It's both our path and this thrilling and challenging race, but we are tracked into a specific pathway. We start with our training, pick our academic niche, and aim to end up the expert in our field. In many disciplines, we see an increase in focus over time with super subspecialization academics. Sort of like self-differentiation, going from TOTI to pluri to multi and finally to a unipotent state. Yes, we can collaborate, work in team science, doing transdisciplinary research, but for some, the path and focus can seem narrow and narrow over time, maybe even a little bit restrictive. So this is the question that everyone should ask themselves periodically, whether or not you are ready to make a leap. Is staying the course still the right option? Now, I love this quote by Edward Bernays. Yes, I was a history and sociology major back in the day. The great enemy of any attempt to change men's habits is inertia. Civilization is limited by inertia. This is what we're trying to avoid, inertia, whether it is stillness, again, being stuck, or movement in the same direction, despite it no longer being the most beneficial path. So what did I ask myself? Medicine. I'd committed more than 20 years in training at this point. I had great job security, but honestly, it was a game of life career. I'm not sure how many of you guys remember that game, but the original game of life careers from 1960 included doctor, journalist, teacher, lawyer, and physicist. It was very easy for my friends and family to understand that I was a doctor and a teacher. Why would I ever want to switch jobs? Well, in order to truly know whether staying where you are is the right course of action, you need to be in a position to see the bigger picture of what's out there. And this can be extraordinarily difficult, especially when you are in the weeds, in the day-to-day slog of academia, going from grant cycle to grant cycle. Now, others may be of service here, since they can see that you're not happy and when you don't even know the color of the sky. But be careful about who you ask or listen to for advice. In fact, I've received some complicated advice many times from those around me in academics. They said, it's the same everywhere. No, this is the best we can expect. You have a really good situation. And my personal favorite, it's a privilege and an honor to work here. But perhaps they cannot truly offer an informed or objective opinion. Therefore, in order to get out of the pre-contemplation phase, consciousness raising therapy can be very helpful. These are activities to broaden your circle, raise your awareness about what's out there, hearing from others who are more transparent about the pros and cons about alternative paths. And most importantly, be cognizant about those with a possible agenda. This is where I think about the 6 degrees of separation. Will your mentor or sponsor be able to give you objective advice and in a safe space? Perhaps it's talking to those outside your institution who can listen and advise you with no skin in the game. And I include facilitators and coaches in this list. And of course, Raise Echo was part of the process for me. Hearing from you last year, share your views, uncertainties, and experiences helped me move out of my own inertia. So now you're in a stage where you might be aware that there's a problem, perhaps not with the environment and job as a whole, but how you fit into that environment and job and whether you feel fulfilled. This is situational awareness. This contemplation phase is critical for your decision-making process because you define what's not working, what you want, and if and how you can address it. Remember when I talked about how we can be tracked into a super subspecialized role? Well, when thinking about transitioning out of academia, the most important advice I received from my coach and others was to take a step back and realize that I had a lot to offer another employer, both in and out of academics. I was pluripotent. My future viability was not contingent on my current success as defined by my institution. I was more than just a clinician researcher at an academic medical center, triple boarded with a niche focus in operations research. I feel like I'm tooting my own horn, but no, seriously. In fact, for these last 9 years, I'd had multiple roles. We all wear so many different hats. And moving forward in these roles, I had accomplished some very big things with application to other environments and job prospects. These lend themselves to very marketable skills and, of course, desirable abilities for my future employer. Notice that the things I have listed under accomplishments, skills, and abilities aren't specifically limited to my grants and publications. We are all so much more. So now that I remember that I'm fabulous and you're all amazing too, it's time for the needs and goals assessment. I'm sure everyone in this group has some career goals in mind, perhaps pretty well-defined ones using the SMART criteria and with similar timeframes to that we were asked in grad school or fellowship interviews about our 10-year, 5-year goals and the like. But remember, I want you to choose needs that are specific to you in your life and within your control, not defined by others' expectations. No one will judge you for your choices, nor is anyone else's approval even necessary, other than your loved ones, of course. And most importantly, remember that your needs and goals are not limited to just the career domain. It goes without saying that we should not be ashamed or afraid of including other domains in our priority list, or even prioritize them higher on the list than career. It doesn't change our potential. It just helps guide our decision analysis on the job search and for future career development. So we know what we want, and now it's time to prep for that change. We enter the stage of preparation and determination. So after broadening our circle, it's time to be more deliberate about researching alternative paths. These can be achieved both anonymously on social media, online searches, and more publicly or privately with posts on Facebook or networking directly with others in and out of your circle. You know, it's more than who you know, but who your friend's friend knows. For me, I also benefited tremendously from coaching. And I actually chose to have someone outside of medicine, which was really helpful for me to assess my true skills and abilities and market myself beyond the traditional academic arena that I knew far too well. But you know, someone in medicine can also be helpful. But overall, quick reminder for this process, you can use this networking to both explore options and to potentially find an advocate for you during the hiring process. That personal vouch does go a long way. So putting this all together, you want to be very familiar with your skills and what you're good at, what benefits you want to experience in your job. And this includes everything from financial to societal impact. And of course, pick something you enjoy and you like doing. Where these three overlap is your sweet spot and can be potentially found in a broad range of jobs in industry, in policy, and government, as we quickly discovered. Now, I list a few here that I consider in my process, but this list is by no means comprehensive. Now, of course, once you have the sweet spot identified, it's time to blow up your CV and rewrite your LinkedIn profile. Remember, your academic CV won't necessarily impress or get you far outside of academia. In fact, my external CV was structured in the same format that was needed for institutional promotion. My impact statement was on page 5, hidden within dense prose, a total non-starter for employers and headhunters. So let's think differently and condense our lives into 2 pages. Now, I give a screenshot of my friend's CV. She went from grant-funded bench research to industry a few years before me, and I used it to model my approach. We start with the headline. This is the role you want to play and how choosing you will benefit the organization. What are your relevant skills? These depend on the role you will be selecting. My friend highlighted her technical and research skills, but maybe you want to highlight your leadership and management skills. You also want to emphasize your biggest accomplishments and contributions that will make the hiring folks yell, yes, we need this person. And for big accomplishments, you want to be including quantifiable information. You secured X number of dollars of grant funding. You completed X number of studies that resulted in Y improvement in patient outcomes or Z number of high impact publications. Now, my friend included her accomplishments under relevant work experience, where she talked about her project management, broad knowledge base, and independence. She didn't really talk about the fact that she had worked on this Nature paper that was really high impact. After all this, then you can list the positions held in chronologic order. Ideally, they show a strong progression of advancement and increased responsibility. And you can include clinical and volunteer work and teaching responsibilities if it's relevant to the job posting. You then end with the rest of the usual content of the CV, but please only include selected publications if they add specific value, because you can always include a bibliolink. So now we are ready for action and maintenance. I merged these 2 change steps because it can be a really fluid process with a lot of circling back. Now you're fully prepped for change. You have potential options. How do you decide what's next? magic 8-ball, a 20-sided die, or a magic magnetic pendulum thing that told me to ask a friend. This thing is still on my desk, by the way. In reality, I'm a very quantitative person, as some of you know, and I prefer numbers and more structured decision analysis. So from that previous needs and goals assessment, I designate some evaluation criteria for any job prospect. And the next few slides are essentially that process. And I want you guys to hopefully use this as an example of something you can do. There's lots of different ways to approach it, but you always want to start with what's important to you. And for me, in no particular order, financial aspects were important. What are the salary and benefits? Do I have discretionary funds and dedicated resources to be successful? What's the clinical environment like? How many shifts am I going to do? What clinical hats would I wear? Who would I supervise? Was there a backup pool in case of emergency? How about the research environment? How productive and collaborative was the group? Were there shared resources, or would I be responsible for getting my own statistician and coordinator? I have to bring up, of course, personal satisfaction. It's important to me to be intellectually stimulated, have opportunities for mentoring and personal career development. And of course, work-life balance. I wouldn't mind the commute, for instance, if the schedule was friendly to my kids' sports schedule. Now, these overarching categories may seem more in line with academic jobs, but they can be easily adapted or expanded for industry, policy, government, anything. It's whatever's important to you. So what's the next step? We got to rank these criteria for importance, with 5 being the best. Most important to me, and this is not surprising after the last 3 years, was personal satisfaction and work-life balance. Financial and patient care, less so. This was after discussion with my partner. It was okay if we took a loss, as long as I wasn't going to experience death by charting. Now, no, you can have any number of categories and the weights don't have to be mutually exclusive, but I'm going to be using a simplified model for illustrative purposes. So your weighted criteria can now be used in this simplified decision analysis matrix. I present my own job search in a simplified Pew matrix, originated from Stuart Pew. It's an engineer and product development, design, management, and engineering. And this approach gives us a relative comparison of the baseline or current option compared to the alternatives. It's a ranking method that can help us organize our thoughts when it comes to different prospects. First, you want to start out by laying out your options, and these are real ones for me, with the current job being 0. Now you compare job option against your current job. So I give ones for job option 1. Is it the same? Is it better? Is it worse? If better or worse, to what degree? I delineate this using equal signs, pluses, and minuses. The key thing here is that you want to grade each option separately, only comparing against the current job. Now, I've given my ratings for the 3 options that I considered in the later phase of my research. So you have a completed table as an example. Now onto the math. First, add in the category weights, then multiply the weight by the rating. Equal sign is 0, 1 plus is 1, 1 minus is -1, and so on. You want to do this for each criteria. So in this example, job 1 gets 12 points for work-life balance. And I don't know, I can't see the audience right now, but I can tell you that you don't have to sort of know how to do this right now. It's easily something you can Google. There are references that I'm going to provide in the next one that can show you how to do this in case this is of interest. But for me, I wanted to show you, you can finally just sum the points and you get a ranked order list for each job prospect. Note, there is not always a clear winner, as was the case for me, but clearly job 2 was a non-starter, despite the fact that I'd started out thinking it was so much better than my current position. And I do also want you to remember that this is not a static tool. You want to use it dynamically to help inform your negotiation. What would it take to go from a minus to a plus in a certain criterion? Would an extra coordinator help the research environment go from 1+ to 3+? You can also revise this matrix multiple times in your search process as you get more offers, different info about the job option, or as you negotiate for a larger package. Sadly, finding a job is its own job, and your timeline may not sync with all prospects. I needed to sort out whether I would move before my kids started high school and middle school, for instance, so my timeline was really compressed. It can also be a very non-linear journey. There is a lot of circling back, dead ends, and loops that initially seem to go nowhere, though later you might be able to see that progress forward. And total sidebar, if you haven't played this game, this image is from a game called Monument Valley. I highly recommend it. It's pretty symbolic of the twists and turns of the career search, and I often just do it just for my own mental sanity. But seriously though, additionally, your search's activity may fall into the early versus late phases. I invest more time into these intro conversations with a lot of different job prospects just to make the interview and job talk phase more high value, more targeted, because I was on that tight schedule. And of course, this is the depressing part. Remember that change model has a relapse phase. Not surprising, even in the career search, we could experience setbacks. This one lesson I learned the hard way. You really need to build up your resilience to handle the responses of those around you when you share your decision to leave. This sharing and the subsequent reactions of your peers and the leadership can happen even earlier in the search process, depending on when you choose to share. So steel yourself. This list is everything that was dumped on me, and honestly, I'm still processing some of the responses that I experienced. But others will support you, and you will enter the maintenance phase, where you will continue to adapt to your situation. And this is outside of our scope of our talk today, but briefly, know your worth. You picked this job, so now make it what you need and want. You want to capitalize on opportunities to continue career development in this new job so that you are better positioned for the next one. And of course, periodically reflect and reassess your priorities. And if it worked for you, revisit that Pew matrix. So some final thoughts. No single right path exists and is not predetermined. You are not stuck and your path is not fixed. You have within you and have access to catalyst resources to push you out of your inertia. Be open to even the unexpected. Maybe it's not industry, but it's taking an academic job in a different city. You can handle the unknown. Don't stay with the devil you know by default. And finally, have confidence in your decision-making process. Don't rush this. Don't jump into a new job just because you're running away from your own dumpster fire and leap from the contemplation to action phases so quickly. If you're methodical and you run to a job on your own terms, which fits your parameters, then you can trust that you have selected the right position. And with that, I will end and say thank you so much.